They can hear us. Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to the actual event. We're gonna get started pretty soon. Just hold on tight. Hello, everyone. Guys, we're gonna start right now soon about the event. So if you guys can all grab a seat, which would be great. Grab your food, grab your beer, and get it started.
Wow, okay. 200. So which category are you in?
Slowly migrate to the chairs. Come on, guys. Let's start pretty quick right now. All right. Well, while you're getting your pizzas, I'll get introductions out of the way. Welcome to ETC Labs. Thanks for joining our event. My name is Ankit. I'm the community manager here at ETC Labs. Liz is, where is she? Where are you, Liz? Liz is over there, our program director. We got Terry in the house. Terry? Terry's right there, our CEO. Woo! And then we got Daniel Jones from First Point, our guest speaker, and Alex right here. So, yeah, great to have you guys here at our event. Hope you guys like the pizza food and pizza and beers and stuff like that. It's great. So, let's quickly run down. We are starting off with a quick, learning about mining, and Alex is going to demonstrate how it goes, what happens in that sense, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. From there, we're going to go straight to a fireside chat between Daniel and Alex. You guys can question him, whatever things that pop into your head. You guys are willing to pick their brains. Trust me, they're very knowledgeable. And then finally, we have our startups in the back over there demoing. So we got Scanta, Anilog, and GSE Platform. You guys are welcome to go over there, talk with them, see what they're doing on ETC. So once again, thanks for coming, and let's get started. Alex? Give a hand for Alex, guys.
Hi, everybody. Let me pull up my presentation. So the title of this talk is, How Does Proof of Work Work? And, just before I kind of get into it, I want to introduce who I am. So my name is Alex Tsankov. I work on one of the largest, or the largest dApp right now on Ethereum Classic. It's called P3C. And, I'm based in New York City, and over the past 6 months, I've been doing a lot of consulting work with hedge funds in New York who are making huge loans to distressed mining facilities. So with the huge drop in the price of cryptocurrency, there's been a lot of these miners that have started to go underwater. And the reason why they were sort of coming out to a lot of the funds there is that they had these really sweet deals, these electricity deals, in places like Eastern Washington, Oregon, etc. And if they didn't use the power, they would lose these contracts. And they were coming out looking for loans to be able to continue keeping on the lights. So over the past 6 months, along with my work on P3C, I spent a lot of time sort of looking into the balance sheets of these mining facilities and figuring out exactly how proof of work actually operates. So hopefully I want to share a little bit of my excitement about this area with you guys as well. So in order to really understand proof of work, and the reason why it's such a monumental and groundbreaking system is that it's fundamentally rooted in something we see in biology. And it's something called the handicap principle. And what the handicap principle says is that reliable signals, so when I'm telling you something that could be controversial or could be disagreed upon, when I'm telling you something, I have to exert some sort of cause to back it up. And we actually see this everywhere in biology. But I think that the best example of this is actually in deers. So you can see right there, there's two pictures of two male bucks. And what these male bucks are trying to say is they're trying to advertise to female bucks, hey, I'm an attractive, young male, please mate with me. And I have lots of food to be able to take care of our children. But there's no real way to confirm that. So what they do is they grow these pairs of antlers. And really there's not much of an actual biological purpose of these antlers. They don't help them eat more, they don't create more food for them. Really they're just a way of advertising, hey, I'm successful. I'm able to get a lot of calories. And if we are able to mate together, we'll all be able to get a lot of those calories for our children. And that's really all they're saying. And the beauty of this system is that you really can't fake it. You can't just grow these antlers without exerting the calories necessary to do so. And that's why it makes the message actually useful. So basically, as I'm going through this talk, I want you guys to keep this in mind, this handicap principle, this idea that in order to prove something is right, you need to exert something of value to get there. So right there's a white paper. Some of you guys may have read it, some of you guys may have not. I would highly recommend everybody does. And what the white paper is called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And it's actually a very bare bones technical document. And what I've done right here is I've printed out the abstract, and I've actually circled the part, or squared the part, that is useful and novel. And what Satoshi is saying right now is that there's a problem with the idea of making electronic cash. So the problem is that if I were to send $1 to somebody else, I could then broadcast that transaction again, sending the money elsewhere, and that's called a double spend problem. I can take the same money and spend it 2 places at once. So the question is, how do you come up with a trusted or a verifiably true single source of truth in a distributed network? And what Satoshi proposed was hash-based proof of work. So what he's saying is that the canonical source of truth, where that money is supposed to go, where that Bitcoin is supposed to go, is the sequence of events backed by the largest pool of hash power. So basically, you can you take all of these, you bundle them together into a blockchain, and really, the actual data structure of a blockchain, it's not new. It was innovative. It was actually invented in the 1970s. But the big breakthrough was how do you actually decide on which of these multiple blockchains that could exist in the world is true. And what Satoshi said was the one backed by the most hash power. And there was one important caveat to that, which is that you need to assume that the majority of the hash power is controlled by honest parties. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind, is that Bitcoin does not work if more than 50% of the hash power is dishonest. And that's sort of the core assumption of the system. But overall, if more than 50% of the hash power is honest, it will be able to come up with the true answer as to who owns what Bitcoin and what the chain of events that got us there was. So with that being said, I want to actually get into what proof of work is with a little demonstration right here. So this is a wonderful website that you guys, I'll try to send out this slide later, but I really want you guys to check this out. So in order to understand how proof of work works on Bitcoin, you need to first, and Bitcoin, a lot of what we're learning right now with Bitcoin can be equally applied to Ethereum Classic. So I'm going to get into that later, but basically we're just going to focus on Bitcoin right now because it's the easiest to understand. So in order to first understand proof of work, you need to know what a hash function is. So a hash function takes input, so data, and it produces a deterministic output. So if I type in right here, hello world, it produces that hash right there. And the beauty of this system is that if I put in hello world, I will always get the same hash. But if I take that hash, I can't necessarily reverse back to hello world. So if I add a character in, it changes it in a completely different way. So that's the first most important element of proof of work in Bitcoin, which you need to understand, which is that you can take data in and produce a hash. So that's what a hash is. Now let's go to what a block is. So a block is a unit of information. So this is block number 1, and block number 1 has this notch right here. But let's put in data into it. So the data that would be stored on Bitcoin are transactions. So things like So Alice sends 5 Bitcoin to Bob. Now, in real Bitcoin, this is actually in a very sort of complex way put in there, but really what the system is saying is finding some way to keep a ledger of who goes to what. And right now that generates a hash. But as you can see, this block is red. It's not considered a legitimate block. And what Bitcoin wants is it wants there to be, when you generate a hash, a certain number of zeros in front of it. Now, if you remember earlier, you can't easily go from figuring out what the data is to getting the hash, and vice versa. You need to actually run the computation to figure it out. So what we're seeing right here is we're saying block plus nonce plus the data equals this hash, and there are no zeros in front of it. But let's actually try to mine it, which means that we go through a loop of these nonces to see if we can find a certain number of zeros in front of the hash. So I'm going to run this mine algorithm in my browser right now. So right now it's working. And look what it did. It was able to find that if you take the nonce right there, 49367, and you concatenate that with the message, you're able to get that hash right there with 4 zeros in front of it. And that's significant because it's not easy to figure that out. I had to loop through a lot of nonces in order to figure it out. So let's try to change it for a second. Let's say Alice to Gordon. You can see that same nonce didn't work. There's no more, there isn't the 4 zeros in front of there. Because when you concatenate it all together, it doesn't function. So in order to create this new block, I need to mine again. And as you can see, you come up with a completely separate nonce when you change a little bit of the data. So that's really important to keep in mind. So let's take what we learned with a block and actually turn it into a blockchain. So as you can see, what is a blockchain? It's a chain of blocks. And let's put a little bit of data in there. So the first bit of data is Alice 5 to Bob, Bob 2 to Ankit, Ankit 3, or Ankit 1 to Sarah. And as you can see, they don't actually line up properly. So let's imagine we go through the mining process. So the first one, we want to mine it to find the 4 zeros in front of it. So we run the mining process. So the nonce to get that was 87811, and we basically created the hash 0009E. So then we go to the next block. So this is happening every 10 minutes with Bitcoin, and this is actually huge. It's filled with tons of these. It's actually a megabyte's worth on BTC. So the second block that we have, we're taking in the previous hash, and we're trying to compute this. So let's try to mine this again to get these 4 zeros in front of that. So the nonce that we come up with is 3594. And let's do the next one. Okay, so as you can see, the blockchain grows over time, and it depends on what the previous one was in order to be able to work. Now, this is the big deal with Bitcoin. This is the big deal behind everything that we're doing. Let's imagine I'm a malicious party, and I want to go back in time and I want to take people's money. So what I do is I go back to the beginning, and I say, you know, I don't like that Bob has 5. I want to change it so that Bob has 4. So I go back, and I change that. But if you notice, it completely messes up everything that came after it. And that's really where the protection of Bitcoin comes from. Because if I wanted to say that Alice only gave 4 to Bob, which is changing the history in the past, I would need to remine every block. So I'd need to mine this one again, I would need to mine this one again, and I would need to mine this one again. And going back to the core breakthrough of Satoshi, what Satoshi was saying was that if more than 50% of the hash power is honest, they'll be able to outpace the attacker. So the honest hash power will be adding new blocks to the correct chain, while the hacker is going to be wasting their time going in the past trying to remine the malicious blocks. And if the honest side has more than 50%, they'll always be faster than the dishonest side. So that's really the core idea behind proof of work. And what proof of work is it's simply this button right here, this mine button. It's going through all of those possible nonces and trying to figure out which one of them increases the right amount of zeros. And the way that difficulty works in Bitcoin, it's very simple. Right now, this only requires 4 zeros. What if we required 10 zeros in front of it? That means we need to go through exponentially more, not exponentially, orders of magnitude more iterations in order to come up with the correct knots. So that's, when people talk about difficulty in Bitcoin going up and down, it's basically the network requiring either more or less zeros in front of it. So that was a lot, and now you guys know more about proof of work than a lot of other people in the crypto space. So thank you guys for paying attention to that. So that's kind of the core idea, and now we can kind of see what ended up happening. So let me go back to present mode again. So what happened is that we now have this system that incentivizes the expenditure of energy to be able to come up with the correct answer of the correct distributed ledger. So one of the natural byproducts of this, and this was predicted by Satoshi in 2008, which is pretty incredible that they saw this far into the future, was the creation of specialized devices that were particularly good at this single task. And that task is mining. So as you can see right here, this is a logarithmic scale of the Bitcoin's network's hash rate. Uh-oh. Did this turn on? No, let's not power it on. Okay, perfect. So this is a logarithmic scale of the network's hash rate. So what it's saying is that in 2010, the hash rate was 100 times lower than what it was in 2011, which was 100 times lower than what it was in 2012. And the reason why it was able to increase exponentially is because you started getting more and more specialized devices. Now, ASICs are a very, very controversial topic today. Some people think that they're really good. Some people think that they compromise the protection of the network. So really the purpose of this talk is not to make an argument either way, but what I want everyone to be left with is just that this is a natural byproduct of incentivizing a very particular type of work. People get very efficient with it. So now to Ethereum Classic. So why is it that personally I was so drawn to Ethereum Classic? I actually entered the ETC community about 6 months ago, and I've been interested, so I remember hearing about ETC in around the time of the DAO, and it interests me. But really, to me, what sort of made me super interested in ETC is the focus specifically on proof of work-based smart contracting system. So as you can see right here in this quadrant, there's really 2 types of consensus algorithms. So we have proof of work, proof of stake, and then we have non-Turing complete, so things like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Monero, which you can't run smart contracts on. And really the only major blockchain platform right now that is planning on staying proof of work and is Turing complete is Ethereum Classic. So I was personally drawn to it because I knew that the smart contracts that I could create on top of it could really benefit from the things that made Bitcoin so powerful. So things like sound money. Ethereum Classic has a 230 million ETC cap. Things like a clear issuance schedule, so you know exactly how many of them are coming over time. A clear commitment to work as always being the consensus mechanism that's going to be there. And then just a general focus on immutability as a whole. So when you deploy a smart contract that maybe interacts with another smart contract, even if that other smart contract were to get hacked, you know that it wouldn't change. And that actually really matters a lot, and I think that we're going to see it matter more over time as the network grows exponentially. So ETC sort of became the natural home for me with these sort of benefits in mind. So a little bit about the life of a miner, and there's really all types of miners, and you'd be surprised to learn where people are mining and what their motivation is and why they're doing it. But there's really a couple of things that in my experience, I've noticed everywhere, which is the people with the most hash power are in it for the profits, okay? There's a lot of smaller miners that are doing it for ideological reasons. They mine things because they're interested in it, because it's fun, because they believe in the mission. But the big producers of hash power are in it entirely for profit-based metrics, and if it's no longer profitable to mine a particular coin, they will turn off their facilities to do so, because they're potentially losing thousands of dollars a day to be able to mine something. So they're always mining what is profitable, and what I've seen in the past is that certain miners, like I've talked with miners before who are big fans of Ethereum Classic, and I said, oh, you guys should mine some Ethereum Classic. And they're like, yeah, we'll definitely do that. But what it turns out that they were doing is that they were mining some random, proof of work based altcoins, and then immediately going to the market and then selling it for Ethereum Classic. And that's how they were acquiring ETC through their mining process. They weren't even really mining it. So they're always mining for what's profitable. So second of all, a lot of the time they liquidate the cryptocurrency immediately for electricity costs. And really electricity costs is the big thing when it comes to mining. So when you're gauging the profitability of a mining operation, it's entirely based on how much are you paying for electricity now, and how long do you have access to that electricity? Because if you set up one of these facilities and the electricity disappears in, let's say a month, then all of that time and effort would have been lost. And then the important thing, and this is with Bitcoin specifically, is that the difficulty adjusts every 10 days, and that actually matters a lot for miners, because some of these facilities take a while to actually power on again, so they'll be powering them on and off and profit switching as they see fit to basically maximize these difficulty adjustments. And just kind of a side note, there's two types of miners right there. So the one in the corner is a GPU-based miner, so this is more what you're going to see in ETH Classic, Ethereum, etc. And then at the top, that kind of cube one is a Bitcoin miner. That's an Antminer S9, and that's pretty much where most of the world's Bitcoins are currently being mined from. It's a bunch of these Antminer S9s and facilities like the ones below. That's one in China right now. But basically, miners are going to mine wherever it's profitable and use whatever is profitable. So when you're a miner, the way that it works is that there's a block reward every 10 minutes, in Bitcoin particularly. And that means that if you're a small miner, you really can't count on getting that block reward every 10 minutes. So what you do is join a pool. And the way that the pool works is it aggregates together all of the hash power of the pool members. And then when it wins a block as a pool, it distributes that based on your share. So that allows you as a miner to have sort of a continuous stream of income by pooling risk, rather than having to focus on trying to mine individual blocks. Now there's a disadvantage to this, because it gives tremendous power to pool operators. So when you're operating one of these, like, let's say, one of those Antminers right there, and you connect to a pool, that pool could theoretically put any sort of proof of work that it wants to your miner, and your miner is not smart enough to actually know what it's mining. So it could be mining a different blockchain, it could be mining a potential attack on a blockchain, a 51% attack. There's a bunch of things where if you're only a miner and you're relying on a mining pool, you can be compromised. So these pools are actually very political, different ones there. So for the Bitcoin pool right there, so for the Bitcoin mining ecosystem, it sort of looks decentralized. It's actually a lot more centralized than it is. Antpool, BTC.com, via BTC, BTC.top, those are really controlled by, or have a controlling interest by, like a single entity. And again, there's no value, there's not really an ethical value judgment that I'm making about that. It's just, this is what happens with proof of work systems. They encourage consolidation of power, because if you have the most efficient mining operations, you can create orders of magnitude more profitability and grow much faster than someone with a much less profitable mining operation. So this one in the corner right here, this is the ETC network. And as you can see right here, it looks more centralized than the Bitcoin one is. You have two main players, Ethermine, Nanopool. And actually, as someone who runs one of the largest ETC dApps, I think that these are fantastic mining pools because they mine very consistently and they accept low fees. So the users of the dApps only have to pay about 0.01 GWay in terms of fees in order to actually use it. Now, there are some mining pool operators, which are actually not very friendly. So I'm gonna name and shame one of them. So F2 Pool right here, they're a pretty small portion of the hash power. They have a tendency to mine zero transaction blocks, which is a block with nothing in it. And they do it because there's a slight profitability edge to be gained, but there's a huge cost in terms of user experience because from a user perspective, rather than being confirmed immediately, they have to wait longer. So as miners, we have a choice of where to point our hash power. And I would encourage the ETC community to try to keep, to focus on mining pools that are aligned with the user's best interest. So Ethermine, Nanopool, et cetera, are actually really good pools. So there are two main costs that we have to keep in mind with proof of work. So the first cost is sort of the ethical cost, which is that proof of work incentivizes expenditure of energy. There's really no debate to be had over that. If proof of work systems are successful, we have to spend more energy to secure them. Now, the question is, how are we creating this energy? So there are some places, in China, in Russia, et cetera, where they perform mining using very carbon-intensive systems like coal plants, oil plants, natural gas, et cetera. However, there are also a lot of very interesting approaches to mining which are kind of unconventional you wouldn't think about. So that picture right there, that's in Canada, and there's actually miners that will set up next to oil operations, oil wells, and those oil wells produce natural gas as a byproduct of the drilling process. So what these miners do is they take that, burn it in a generator, it wouldn't be naturally just dispersed in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. So they burn it in a generator, and then they're able to create economic value from it by powering a miner. And that's actually good because certain things like methane, for example, are incredibly bad for the atmosphere, and actually sometimes it's better for these things to be burned. So it's good that there's a financial incentive there as well. Up in the upper corner, that's a planned facility in Morocco. So Morocco has access to some of the best wind energy in the world, and they're planning on building a Bitcoin mining there to take advantage of that wind energy. I can also say from personal experience that the most profitable Bitcoin mining operations that I saw when I was basically helping write loans are the ones that are connected with hydroelectric power. So if you have access to cheap hydroelectric power, chances are you're a very, very happy miner. So the second cost, and something that I think that we all need to keep in mind, is performance. So proof of work is not free. Someone has to actually pay the cost for that. And that costs are generally borne by dilution of coin holders. So every 15 seconds, we create new ETC, and that ETC is then sold on the market to pay for the electricity or the mining costs. And this can be really expensive. So we need to always keep that in mind, that are the use cases that we're coming up with worth the costs to actually pay for this security? And I think this is another really good visualization to keep in mind, which is this is generally the timings in computer science that all programmers need to keep in mind. So if you're accessing cache on a chip, it takes about 2 nanoseconds. And the difference between accessing on a chip versus accessing on a disk is like the difference between going from across this room to going to Pluto. That's a huge difference. And your customers are going to feel that difference. And you know what the difference between a hard disk and going a 10-minute Bitcoin block? It's like crossing half the universe, okay? So we have to keep that in mind, the UX concerns of using these blockchain applications and who's going to pay these costs. So I just want to finish up with, with all of these costs, we also get a prize. And the prize that we get is that we're able to code systems that can be set in stone. So this is a picture right there of Hammurabi's column. And I'm curious, who here, raise their hand, has heard of Hammurabi's column? Okay, so Hammurabi's column is a really important thing to keep in mind. This was created around, I think around 5000 BC, really, really long ago. Maybe a little bit later than that. And what it was it was created by the king, Hammurabi, and what he did was he had every law that he wanted followed inscribed into the column itself. And he placed that column right in the middle of the town square. And why was that important? Well, because before that, if you were a peasant, and let's say, for example, you disrespected the Lord, they would come up with some new law that you had supposedly broken, and then have you either put to the death or flogged, or they can appear like a nice guy because they were showing you mercy. But with Hammurabi's column, everybody could look in the middle of the thing and say, look, you did this crime, this is exactly the punishment that's created for it, or if something happens, this is what happens. What's interesting about Hammurabi's column is that it's partially a social invention, but it's also a technical invention. So people needed to have the ability to write, people needed to have the ability to put it into stone, because with stone, it can't be changed, and it can survive for a long time. And stonemasonry was absolutely key in order to come up with this sort of important social invention. And the reason why I'm so attracted to Ethereum Classic is because it allows us to do in digital cyberspace what Hammurabi's code allowed ancient people to do in their society. And once we sort of have this feeling of immutability, of what the code that you see is the code that's always going to run, I think that we open up the use case for brand new digital technologies, things like money, insurance, laws, government, smart contracts, etc., that were previously impossible before that. So with proof of work, there are great costs, but there are also enormous benefits. And we don't quite yet know all of the benefits that will come out for it. We're all looking for sort of these new use cases. But in my opinion, I think Ethereum Classic is sort of the place that I found that best embodies what I think makes blockchain and proof of work so good. So that's my talk, and hopefully you guys learned a lot about how proof of work works.
More food. Stick around to hear P3C, Alex, and Burstcoin have a conversation about kind of what's going on today in the proof of work space and the mining space. So stick around.
Yeah. And your eye contact?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
If I look at it?
If you look at it, it starts looking back.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Alex. So I have a question more on
Hey guys, 15 more minutes and then we'll start our next one.
Really, it was just that one pool, F2 pool, like doing that. And yeah.
I just wanted to confirm my assumption. Thank you.
Yeah, so really I only saw it at Google. And technically it is more profitable to do that. But most people don't do it because the user experience is bad for the coin itself. So yeah, you'll be able to get these really PC. But from a user perspective, you're not going to use it here at Classic. So literally, like right here, yeah.
Yeah.
You can just come up here in the back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If it's profitable for them to do so, they will. As long as it's profitable. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'll make sure to post it on. Yeah. I need to figure it out with the content, but I'll probably post it in the Eventbrite group so that way everyone can have access to it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can just write down your email. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, no, it is the funniest thing. I mean, the biggest takeaway that I got after really kind of working on the whole time is that you can never expect a miner to not hash whatever the problem is. Exactly. Because they are a legitimate business. That's where people are thinking. So a miner can't go to an investor and say, oh, we're mining this other coin because it's competitive in the long term. Their investors aren't going to buy that. So they really trying to oh, yeah, I'd like to understand what their philosophy is.
We're taking a 15-minute break, and then we're going to start the. Hey guys, Ankit here. If you guys can hear me, please say something. Essentially, we're gonna have a talk between Daniel Jones and Alex. So what's gonna happen is they're just gonna relay some questions, discuss. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to add them to the comment section, and then I'll try to get the questions out there. All right? Cheers. Stay tuned. I'm only like 10 minutes, guys.
So I can, if you have GPU rig, you can set your GPU rig to them, and then they'll just, whoever buys this buys that.
Oh, this is for
I don't know about I would say that there's because I did research. So basically I researched this. I said, because I learned mainly from mining. I developed security classes, but I mined. And what I looked at is, okay, I can use this, and I put it to a regular what's the difference in profitability? And what I found is that Dice Hash is 90% profitability of the whole ecosystem.
yeah, I think so.
90. So that was the reason we take that 10% mining goes down. Are you mining?
But here's the thing is that
Download the software.
I don't ever think I get a ton on a node that I'm running. I never use a node as a wall. I just use it as a if I know that the whole storage or I sign in or so I'm a big fan. Yeah, so I do I am not a fan of this idea of people running their own code because it's very technically difficult to actually run. So I know that there's some people in the technical community that are very interested in how people run their own code. I can tell you one thing, as a consultant, I consult a lot instead of mining because mining is problems. I've never had someone hire me to set up a big company, which then told me there's no sense to really so to me it's really but that's my first
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're gonna get some discussion going on, and you can like come forward to the All right, guys, we're gonna have our Bitfire discussion right now. If you guys can get to your seats, that would be great.
One second.
Actually, Alex, can you go in more? Perfect. Perfect. I think we're pretty much settled down here. We got some talking going on over there. So essentially, this part of the event is both of them battling it out. Well, Alex is going to ask some questions. I have some questions in my back pocket if I need to pull it out. But I will start you guys off with a pretty basic question, right? And first of all, actually, let's have both of you guys introduce yourself. Let's talk.
Hi, my name is Daniel Jones, in quotes, as Cointelegraph put it, aka Mixops. I work with the First Coin community in every aspect, from helping contribute to some pieces to helping DApp developers understand how to do it on the platform, as well as teaching people how to actually use a blockchain if they are developing or architecting an application to use one, and in what ways that they could benefit from them, as well as teaching people how smart contracts work in developing those.
Hi, my name's Alex. So just a little bit about what I'm working on a 9-to-5 basis. So I work on a project P3C, and P3C is a completely autonomous smart contract. It's a 700-line smart contract, and the idea with it is that it provides a steady source of income to people who work in the gig economy, as opposed to an inconsistent one. And the whole point of doing it on Ethereum Classic and doing it in a smart contract is it makes it truly decentralized. So if I were to, let's say, die tomorrow and not be able to work on it, the smart contract and the funds would still be there, regardless of whatever happens to me or the company.
All right. So let's start off with a very basic question, right? The first one I have is mining still relevant today, right? With all the costs associated with it, because all the GPUs, the ASICs, and then all the electricity costs as well, right? And all these factors in, for a day-to-day miner, not for like a big company, is it relevant?
Well, I think from that standpoint, you have to consider that there are also other mining options, such as First Coin presents the opportunity to mine with hard-drive space, utilizing proof capacity consensus, which protects everything that proof of work gave you, except now you have less energy draw and you're able to do it in a scalable fashion that also supports everything that you would see like in classic support, which is smart contracts, introduction into those systems, and to be able to do so in a way that's Turing complete, and to also provide a platform to develop on. But what you run into though, is that whether you're mining First Coin, you're mining Bitcoin, or you're mining anything, you have to understand that there are going to be times in which it is not profitable to mine anything, but you have to be either for profit or not. You have to decide that. Myself, I was involved with Bitcoin since 2009, early days. I was not in it for the profit. I was in it for what it represented, which was everything that was being discussed in the presentation, which, by the way, great job. I mean, amazing job on that. The issue that you run into is that scalability of proof of work. And I think that that's something that we're starting to see. And if you don't think that companies like PG&E here in California and others aren't also watching the growth of miners, you would be sadly mistaken, because they're jacking up prices for electricity.
Yeah, so I'm really interested, so just to give just a comment, I'm really interested in what Burst Coin is doing, because I think that it's an alternative to proof of stake systems. So people always pit together either a proof of work or proof of stake. And proof of work is the one that, you know, is bad for the environment, and proof of stake is the one that's good for the environment. But as I understand it, proof of capacity allows you to get both a sort of relatively green, chain, as well as being able to have the security of proof of work and leverage things like the handicap principle and all that. So I'm kind of curious, could you give us a little bit more insight into what proof of capacity is?
So proof of capacity is the idea of proving capacity, i.e. proving of work or proving of handlers, as you demonstrated. In this case, what we do is we generate an allocation of size. So we use the Chabal 256, which if you're not familiar with that hashing algorithm, I suggest you look at it. At this point, it is ASIC proof due to the fact that it requires a write to a disk. ASICs right now are just generating SHA-256 ephemerally, and they don't care. Problem is when you start writing to a disk, you start changing everything, because now you got to worry about bus speeds. You got to worry about whether or not an operating system is capable of writing that fast, because there are limitations in kernels that we also have to look at. So when we start looking at that, we can see that we are generating the Chabal 256 output into an allocation of size. We'll use 1 terabyte, for example. So I've used my computer or Raspberry Pi or insert device here to generate this 1 terabyte plot. And every 4 minutes, I read from there and I find the answer. However, I may not have the answer, or someone in the crowd may have the answer. But that's not always the award winning for the block, because the deadline is what really matters. So it's a double check verification where you not only have the answer, but who read to it on the disk the fastest. Now, whether it's ECD or SDD, it doesn't matter, or NVMe for that matter, they all read and write the same because they're actually writing into the disk itself in the nonce, not to be confused, the cryptographic function. Also, nonce is used for describing a actual writable spot on a disk. So let's make sure that there's a clear definition change there. In the case of writing, I will refer to the nonce as the actual space in the disk. So the Chabal 256 is outputting this hashing and it's generated to that nonce. Now, one of the interesting things is that there was a certain company, I'm not going to name who, that made this claim that there was an attack that could be made based on that. At 250,000 terabytes, there's not been a collision yet on that. And I would recommend a change that when you start looking at problems with people who are also, by the way, that same company, generating a product similar to what Burst already does, just rebranding it under their own name. But regardless, with proof of capacity, you get a trustless consensus that's low energy impact and the ability to run the chain on anything. And when I say anything, I literally mean anything, because at this time, you can run Java, you can run a Burst node. And if you can run Java, you can also run a Burst miner. Now, the other benefits that it gives you is that versus your browser, for example, you can't automatically crypto jack a user who's mining Burst. The reason why is they have to redo their plots. Plots are signed with a public key that's associated to the account ID. So even if someone steals your mining rig, they have a lot of work ahead of them. This is also a biggest deterrent for the 51% attack vector that exists on proof of work, versus just being able to align a bunch of people to take a hash attack, which we saw, by the way, last week with VeChain and others over this year. What we've noticed is that the biggest deterrent is the fact that for you to 51% attack the network is the time. It's not the money, it's the time, because you can't just turn it on. You have to plot it. So that means you have to buy devices. You're gonna have to turn around, plot those devices. Meanwhile, Western Digital and others are going to say, we had record-breaking sales for this quarter, which, by the way, I don't know if you know that or not, but everyone broadcasts when they have a record-breaking sale. So the deterrent is that with BTC or anything else, I can literally just find a number of people on the internet to work together to do that attack. In the burst coin network, it takes far more, not just hashing ability, you also have to plot the drives and attempt the attack.
So let's say I wanted to start Burst Coin mining right now. Can you describe the exact steps and how long it takes to go from I'm interested to actually being a miner on the network?
Can you give me two things I want to ask you? One, CPU specs. Two, how much drive space you want to give?
So let's say I have a 2 terabyte, attachable disk, and I just have a very basic laptop, so an Intel.
Okay. So for that one, what you would need to do is you would need to first go and set up a wallet, and you can do this online, or you could download the Node software. And by Node, I mean literally the software application that represents a burst node, not to be confused with Node.js. So when you download the Node software, then you can create a wallet. From there, you're giving your wallet ID, and once you have a wallet ID or an account ID or a Reed Solomon-based ID or an American account ID, in that case, you can then use that with what we have called the engraver, which is a plotting software. And basically what you do is you say, I want to use this key, I want to start at this nonce, and this is the size I want to plot. And the software will run for...
Can you give me some time frames?
Yeah, so it'll take, for 2 terabytes on, we'll say, on like my MacBook Pro or something like that, that should take you with a USB-C, 100 megabytes per second throughput on USB-C channel. It's going to take you roughly about 24 hours to plot that.
Okay, so that's a really big distinction, because I can go from a Bitcoin miner being in a box to a Bitcoin miner mining profitably within 10 minutes, or even less than that, just plug it in.
Yeah.
But with Burst Coin, you actually need to start kind of mapping things out. Okay, so I had another question too, which is, what do things look like with mining pools? Are there any Burst mining pools?
Yeah, so there's a large percentage of burst mining pools. For smaller amounts, it's recommended because the answer scheme in which you are looking at figuring out if you have the answer in the deadline read. So large plots, people who have a petabyte or more, are usually solo miners, and those are like ones represented in the ETH Classic where they mine without a pool or anything like that. But the smaller disks typically participate in the pool because it's easier for them to guarantee some sort of payout for them, and you're not at a mathematic, not a mathematic challenge. You never know when you're going to win the block, but you're at a better ROI perspective for most users if you look at it like that. I mean, and for myself, I mine coins because I believe in what they stand for. I don't mine them for profit.
Okay, so let's say I choose to mine for one of these pools. Do I need to download terabytes of data to write to the disk, or do I generate? So I would use the engraver locally, even if I'm mining for a pool?
Correct.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah, that's really cool, actually. So I had another question too, which is, actually, let me just make a comment. So it's kind of funny you mentioned solo mining. So I was having a talk with a guy who was a big Bitcoin miner, and he's been mining for a long time. And I asked him, I was like, okay, well, you control so much hash power. Why do you mine in a pool? Wouldn't it be more profitable for you to mine solo? Because a pool takes a 1% fee. And what he said is, he's like, yep, I actually tried that back in the day. And it was funny because what happened was he started mining solo, so that means he runs his own Bitcoin node, and then he's taking that blockchain in and performing proof of work on it. And 1 week, he actually wasn't getting any block rewards for an entire week. And he was starting to get worried because he's paying all these electricity costs for a week. And he's like, oh my God, okay, I hope everything's going okay. And then finally, at the end of the week, he got his first block, and then it got rejected by the network. He hadn't updated his mining pool software in time. So he had spent all that week, all of that electricity cost mining something that would eventually be rejected by the network. And he said after that, he's like, I only mine with a pool because I don't want to take the responsibility of potentially mining the incorrect thing and it getting rejected by the network. So that was really interesting. I didn't know that before.
Yeah, so I started mining, the only way you could mine back in 2009 was solar mining. There was no concept, like there was the idea of a pool, but they were not there. Basically, everyone just turned on a rig and you just got lucky, right? And if you got lucky back then, it was 50 a block, so it was a much different ballgame than it is today. I mean, the happening's coming up again, you know, and that's one of the things that also with relation to burst, we have a 5% decay per month versus just having the happening, right? And yeah, so one of the things with regards to proof of capacity that parallels with proof of work, everything that proof of work provides, we also provide in proof of capacity in the same trustless sense. Just now we've integrated things such as autonomous transactions or smart contracts, which by the way, Burst was the first coin to have that, and the first cross-chain transaction occurred with Burst and Quora, as well as ARC and a few other coins that later would be added. So it's very interesting when you start looking at details of change, right? Bitcoin now, in the modern implementation of people's latest hash board, we'll say, which they didn't also get consensus of the network, but we'll leave it at that. You have SV and you have this BCH, ABC stuff going on, right? And what you see there is you're seeing this huge hash war for 80 transactions per second and the idea of a smart contract. Well, no offense, but that seems kind of ridiculous with the same 10-minute block time, right? I mean, all of that was a problem. So why not do it in a way that's not going to require a hash war and millions of dollars for electrical parts and ASICs and stuff, and instead being able to facilitate everything both of these promise with a 177 kilobyte block size already, and the ability to execute smart contracts without the need of some dude who claims to be Satoshi that's not.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Low job.
Yeah, he who should not be named.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we can all forget about him, the better. So, you know, one thing that I think is interesting is that right now, in the past 10 years, thanks to Bitcoin, we've gone, and this is just technology that we as humans have, we've gone from being able to generate SHA-256 using a GPU to now, because of financial incentives, creating 7 nanometer microchips that their only purpose, the only reason why they exist, is to perform the SHA-256 calculation as much as possible. And we got there because of the incentives that the Bitcoin network created, which is create SHA-256 as fast as possible. So I'm curious, what are the sorts of technologies that Burstcoin and its mining algorithm is incentivizing?
Well, right now the ASIC groups have been heavily after Burst in the sense of trying to prove that SHA-256 could read and write instantaneous. The problem is that the allocation of the plot and check system that we have in place for dynamic changes, things like that. There's a number of reasons where ASIC manufacturers, and I'm not going to name any names, have attempted to thwart it. However, there's
It's a mark of pride.
Yes.
Be proud. Yeah.
We are very, very proud, but
Yeah.
we're also realistic when it comes to Burstcoin community because people may actually be able to crack something. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so it's better to be humble in the idea that you meet each of those challenges going forward. However, you also have to understand the dire consequences if that is found.
Yeah.
If there is a problem. And that is something that even we today, by the way, which Bitcoin has a huge CVE problem. You should go look at the number of nodes who have patched that CVE. I'm not going to list the number, but that's a nice little double spin attack. That's still out there, by the way, and about 40% of that network have not even updated. And what you run into the same kind of problems, right? How are you going to keep active network participants updating, right? And that goes back to like the trust systems and things like that. We're even in Burst where we're fighting these basic ideas. We also have to be very careful as to understand why they want to challenge and break that.
Yeah, so can you dig in a little bit deeper into what actually these ASICs look like? Are they things with huge disks attached to them?
Yeah, so companies have not come forward. Like we just gather based on the tech that's available, including NVMe, including creating a specific function or attempts to create an FPGA to generate the Shabal 356. And what we've seen so far, I don't want, is no one's been successful at that. Now there have been plenty of people who say they're successful at it, but in practice, no one has as of this day.
Yeah, so I'm curious if someone were to, let's say, come up with an ASIC that could definitively mine on the Burstcoin network, would you guys move to another proof of work, or would you consider just embracing that as reality?
Simple change to the plotting would defeat that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually that's interesting. This happened recently with Monero. There was a ASIC miner that came out from Monero, and then the Monero community decided to fork because they valued the decentralization.
They forked 4 times.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
They
no,
forked
it was
4 times.
4, so that coin split, it was actually 4 on that day, and that was Fluffy Pony, and there was thank you to the people who were working on the ASIC.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, yeah, there's a variety. I know that there's Ravencoin as well, which is basically what they're doing to stop ASICs is they're taking about 6 proof of work algorithms and combining them together in a random way. So the idea is that if you try to make an ASIC for it, one of these embedded circuits, and they were to randomize it, then it would be useless. So that's what they're coming up with. So I'm curious, I had another question for you as well. Do you sort of see, what do you think about proof of stake systems? What's your opinion on those?
Thus far, I will be honest, most people's proof of stake implementation is a trust system. And at the point in which we were creating cryptocurrency, not to be confused with ICOs or any of that stuff, right? Cryptocurrency, currency that is designed to be mined, used, and circulated and distributed. We were to get away from trust systems. The whole point of this exercise is to prevent trust systems. I don't have to trust you, but we can be on the same network and facilitate a transaction to each other. I can pay for a service. I don't have to know who you are. I don't have to in any way, shape, or form, and still be able to facilitate a transaction. Whereas right now, when you use your card, you're placing a lot of trust on both your bank, card manufacturer, reader manufacturer, business, a number of things. And that was the whole point of Bitcoin, was to eliminate trust systems. And if we're going right back into a trust system where there are certain POS coins right now that require you to KYC more than a bank.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic that we kind of see eye to eye on that because that's sort of what got me into eClassic in the first place is that I look at proof of stake systems and to me, you know, it's actually kind of funny because I think that a lot of people in the proof of stake community sort of browbeat people in the proof of work community saying, oh, well, we're more modern, we're more high tech. Actually, I think proof of work is a far more innovative solution to consensus than these proof of stake systems are because proof of work was really something that was invented in the 90s, originally with Hashcash, which was a kind of anti-spam measure invented by Adam Back, and that was cited in the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper. And the idea originally was, Adam Back's idea was, before you sent an email, you would run all of this computation, and the idea was it would be too expensive for spammers to be able to send out millions of emails. And you know, one of the most interesting elements of proof of work, especially on Bitcoin, is that it can't really be faked at all. So the beauty of it is that you could theoretically have this network where you don't know who anybody else is, you don't know where they're located, etc. A really decentralized thing. And you don't have to worry about who it is that's creating the proof of work. Because the proof of work, the certain number of zeros that appear before the hash, it speaks for itself. You know that a lot of energy had to be exerted in order for that to be true. And I think that the beauty of these proof of work systems is that if you think about an adversarial environment, let's say an environment where, you know, cryptocurrency is illegal or something like that, how do you know what's legitimate? All you need to know is that does it have enough zeros in front of it? Those are the good guys. Those are the ones who are who are sort of doing this right, and that really interests me a lot.
So I want to comment on adversarial. Let's talk adversarial. Have any of you ever lived in a country of oppression? Raise your hands. Yeah. If you don't want to, that's fine.
You're not tied to Trump administration.
That's not oppression. What I'm about to describe to you is real oppression. Have you ever had your door kicked in because you were using too much electricity? Probably not, right? That happens in a lot of countries. The reason I bring this up is going back to adversarial. Proof of work requires electricity, a lot of it, continuously. Proof capacity allows for that system to be circumvented in a way that protects the user and people who are participating in helping facilitate that. You have to keep in mind that in a condition where you may or may not have open communication channels, you can utilize coins that take advantage of proof capacity in that consensus. In the case of Burst, I can send encrypted messages. To anyone sniffing the network traffic, all they're going to see is a HTTPS call. They're not going to see me spinning up a Tor packet and broadcasting that I'm using the Onion router. They're instead going to see an encrypted blob transmitted across their network that they're not going to know what it is, but to them it's going to look like web traffic. And there's huge power in being able to participate in an adversarial condition without disclosing your identity, without disclosing what you were doing, and without disclosing anyone else that may be participating to help you. You want to, quote, help people in another region, you have to understand that their operational security is much more important than yours. You live in the United States, you live in a country where they don't care. Talking about people who live in a country where they can be murdered for the idea of what they're participating in. And that's very scary, I know that, but like, people need to get rid of the bows on, oh, we're gonna airdrop to Venezuela. Let's keep in contrast what adversarial means. Typically, when we refer to adversarial in cryptocurrency, we're referring to government regimes and oppressive people.
No, I mean, that's absolutely true. You know, just to give people some numbers so that they understand kind of how, what energy Bitcoin mining does. So that picture that I showed you right there, that was an Antminer S9. That's currently the most popular Bitcoin miner that exists right now. And the Antminer S9 is able to do 14 terahash a second, and it takes about 1,800 watts. So what is 1,800 watts? That's about 10 home desktop computers being run for one while it's running.
So with Burst Coin, it's about 0.2 kilowatts, literally 0.2, 0.2 of a kilowatt.
So that's 200 watts?
Yeah, for the entire network to validate that transaction.
Wow.
Yeah, so to leave a hard drive on, it costs 5 watts. Give or
5
take.
watts per what unit?
Per 10 terabyte unit versus a 3 terabyte versus a 256 gig flash drive, they're all kind of about the same. Depends on the manufacturer and what they're doing, but it's about 5 to 7.
Wow. So actually, the way that miners sort of talk amongst themselves is they're always talking about hash per kilowatt, so, or hash per watt. So in the example earlier where I talked about 14 terahash divided by 1,800 watts, I don't know what that ratio is off the top of my head, but basically that ratio right there is how miners talk about their different facilities and how profitable it is. So I'm kind of curious, how do people talk about it in the Burst Coin community?
Right now, there are a few companies, StorageMining.io, what they do is they do cloud storage, and what they do is they provide you a 4 terabyte slice for a price, but most people who are participating in the Burst Network are not business. They're individuals who run petabytes or several petabytes worth of storage, some that run a couple of terabytes at home because they may not have the currency or the funds to be able to facilitate a petabyte, but you want to participate in the network. So they have, a 4 terabyte Western Digital that they were able to go buy at Fry's for $100. That bar of entry is so low that literally anyone out here probably has the money in their pocket to go and participate as a miner. The Burst Network versus trying to participate in Bitcoin. So when you start talking about Bitcoin versus Burst miners are typically individuals and not business entities. You have some business entities, but not like you see in Bitcoin mining because there's no ASICs. There's no easy way to kick it off.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's really interesting. Those were the questions that I had. Yeah, maybe we can move to audience.
Yeah, anyone in the audience have a couple questions? Anybody? Okay, go ahead, please.
My name is Eugene. I present crypto processing company. Now we are connecting all blockchains, all coins, and we allow merchants to accept coins. One question I have: what is about the economical part of your coin? Each system has fundamental economical parts, such as buy wall, sell wall, who needs your coin, for what features it uses, and who sells your coin. Of course, miners sell the coins. And the question is, do you have some economical model of your coin price, and what is the indicators depends on the price of your coin and who needs your coin?
So Burstcoin is just a cryptocurrency that uses a different consensus algorithm than like Bitcoin. As far as speculatory trade value, like you would place on anything else, I am not a day trader, so I don't know how to answer that question. But
How much is the Burstcoin right now?
Burstcoin right now I think is 0.06 of a cent. So it's like 0.6 of a cent, something like that.
The total supply.
Yeah,
Oh, total supply is 2.158 billion, but that's a fixed limit. It's not going to change. And it started at 10,000 per block and just went down to the 5% per month decay. Right now, the block rewards at 630, something like that.
630?
Yeah, per block, because it's at a 5% reduction per decay.
And what was the logic behind that number, the 5%?
So that was way before my time. That was in 2014. There was some concerns of being able to get addressed in times, making something instantaneous, as we were talking about earlier, may not be beneficial to someone's use. So say for example, I am business A, I'm in a remote village or something, right? I don't need a 15-second block time. And I'll explain to you why. When I have a 15-second block time, my node, the remote village, is not going to synchronize the mempool within 15 seconds. I would need a high-speed internet connection that I'm probably not going to have. So how is a 15-second block time going to help me at all? How are any of these things going to actually help me, the individual, to guarantee that I'm accepting this coin anywhere, and someone's going to come at me and spend this coin? Do I really want a 15-second block time? Is my node capable of synchronizing the mempool? Most nodes aren't. That's where you call into question proof of stake. This is where you start calling into question validation of transactions. Can your computer at home genuinely synchronize, we'll say 4 megabytes, within a couple of seconds from some other node across the planet?
Of course.
My point.
I mean, I'll be honest, I kind of like the 15-second finality time in Ethereum Classic. I mean,
There are pros and cons.
I would say that maybe for a payment processor, it doesn't, you might want, it might be okay,
For
but
applications, you definitely want.
yeah, for application, we're talking about, let's say, a decentralized exchange. Do you want your trade to commit in 10 minutes, or do you want your trade to be committed to blockchain in 15 seconds? So it depends on your use case.
And I will 100% agree with you on that. At a point though, where you need instantaneous like that, why not use a database?
Well, because you don't get the trustlessness. So it's all a trade-off. So right now with Ethereum Classic, for example, you get the 15-second block time, which is, remember that slide up there, it's still way, way more than what a database or a Kafka queue could provide. But you are able to get sort of the proof of work back again.
Again, when I talk about this, I'm talking about software architecture, right? If I know for 100% sure fact that I'm about to generate a transaction on a network that's going to cost exponentially more for the power gains, why would I do that in my architecture versus using a distributed database? One that I can control, because ultimately, say for example, I'm going to point this out, if I hypothetically fork or create some token on a coin, I'm going to make a proof of stake chain, and I'm going to try to create a token economic system, which by the way I don't like. But that idea right there should not require a blockchain. What they're attempting to do should just be literally a database. As they're trying to push the upper limits of like 70,000 TPS, I mean, I don't know what kind of databases you work with, but I'm used to seeing millions of transactions a second.
Well, I'll give you an example. So in P3C, for example, one of the selling points is that even if we were to go out of business as a company, the software would still exist, the database would still be running. So, one of the biggest issues that I have with these private blockchains that people talk about is, and I actually work, that's one of my first jobs in the blockchain space, was actually working on a private blockchain, and as a DevOps person. And that should immediately set off some red flags, because the question is, why does your blockchain need a DevOps person to handle? And what happens if your DevOps person quits or leaves and the blockchain breaks? So those are the reasons why I like a blockchain more than a database, because everyone has to take care of the problem rather than just one person.
So I agree with you. However, that's where the value of running your own node comes in. So even if a coin goes out, right, goes clear, you can always run a node. Yes, there's contradiction of whether or not the transaction is valid. But at a point in which you're running your own node and running your own blockchain and storing your data and doing whatever it is you want to do, it's the same as running a database. And so the reason why I say that to people is that you have to also understand use cases, like whether or not you do need to keep a bunch of people off, because not everything belongs on that chain.
Yeah, so I think this is a fun debate where we actually disagree, because now that I have a few beers in me, I'm a pretty big blogger. I actually don't really, to me it's not very important, the ability to run a node. I think that nodes, there's no profit incentive to run a node on its own. You run a node because you have a business or an application that requires you to run a node. So, for example, you can mine because mining is profitable. The network incentivizes you to mine. The network doesn't care whether or not it's easy for you to run a node. You run a node because you have financial incentive to do so. So my question to you is, do you think, how does Burst incentivize people to run nodes? Or why would someone run a Burst node rather than just a wallet or something like that?
Well, so as far as wallet, so there's a distinction here. I think we're talking about public versus private node. So we have this idea that someone can interact with your API. So for example, that laptop that's in that bag right there, it is not a public node, it's a private node. However, I have an option in there to enable it public so that anyone can interact with it, right? Public nodes, just like BTC nodes or anything else, when you say public node, what you're literally entailing is that someone can access it that you don't know. When you say a private node, you're still running a node, you're still keeping a copy of the ledger, still fact checking everyone, but no one else can access that but you on your local. And you can do that through config files, both exist in BTC, ETH, anything else, right? And so like when we say nodes, when we incentivize people to run nodes, as far as Burst goes, most people are just running nodes because they choose to. A few businesses are running public nodes, but most of the businesses don't even have to run public nodes because they're the only ones interacting with it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I would actually say that as someone who moved from ETH to ETH Classic, I would say that probably the biggest area that we need to improve, and this is just ETH Classic community, is creating something like Infura for ETH. So if you've ever interacted with an Ethereum application, you can just download a browser extension and then connect to a full node within a matter of seconds. So until about 6 months ago, that really wasn't possible in Ethereum Classic. You had to download the entire blockchain, run it locally, and then connect to it locally. And if we're just trying to get average developers to just try out Classic, just see what it is, and we require them to have to sync an entire multi-gigabyte node in order to just test it out and to just play with it, we're going to lose a lot of people. So I think it's really important that we focus on node infrastructure. And just to plug a startup space, ethernode.io they're doing a great job actually spinning up Classic nodes.
So I will say this much right now, that there are options that have already been done, i.e. in the Bitcoin community, where you're doing small 2 gigabyte sync, and literally after that, you're able to use the chain and participate in it, and then in the background it downloads everything. So that could be an option for someone to help offset some of what you're doing, because like literally, do you really need to sync from Genesis? That's a question people ask. I only sync from Genesis. However, when I'm trying to do something, whether I'm using Bitcoin or Burst, right, I still need to be up to date on the chain, right? So the problem is that when I'm spinning up a VM, do I spin up a VM that I have created that has the chain on there, or am I going to attempt to sync? And those are questions that you have to ask yourself as to whether or not to do it. But in Bitcoin, they've created smaller nodes where they start off with a 2 gigabyte sync. After that, start using API calls, things like that, create wallets.
That's awesome. Well, I think that that's it. Just hand it off to Andy.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys. Amazing discussion. You guys are welcome to come up here and to ask some questions after this. Yeah, once again, thanks for all coming. There's still some more pizza, go for it. And you can also still interact with our demo teams. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm not a trader. I'm the worst at that. I run software since it was not profitable. So keep in mind, I was involved in Bitcoin with no doubt. So like when people say, oh, well, was it profitable back then? No, in March of 2009, it was $1,000. So in March of 2009, yeah, so it was $83 and something cents. The fallout was still pro, right? So I worked for a non-chain, non-ICO, nothing to do with it at all. I worked in Amazon where they would recruiting sessions, but here in the chicken space what I'm learning is that there's a whole lot of people who really want to understand fundamental software. They're experts in the field, and I'm here to help educate people on understanding that software performs kind of a task for you. However, at its basic core, once you operate as an engineer, fundamental simple machine, validation processes, that's it. The consensus around how you got there is important. But it's also important not to get too religiously involved in consensus and how they happen. Because that may not always be true. You learn that. And I say that because not just in religious stuff, but also look at BI versus EMAX. Look at IDE versus TextEdit. All of those are religious battles of people's beliefs. Don't get it right. Yeah, I do actually. Well, it's just my personal stuff and there's one less like, oh, hold on, let me show you. No, it's like, I have one more. Yeah, it works like one. Also, like, that's my Twitter handle, so you find me a bit up. Yeah, I'm using it as well. I just, fucking buried. Yeah, put the camera around. Hold on until we're ready. I mean, this is also cool. All right, come on.
I left the live stream running. Whoever is on. Thanks for coming, guys.